Hey, welcome everyone. We're still waiting on a few other panelists, but I think it's a good time to get started. At least introduce the topic. It's in the title, intellectual property rights and branding in the Web3 space. I feel like it's a bit of a murky area because a lot of times projects are anon, people are anon, or even startups aren't really registered. They exist as a name on Twitter, um, or as a protocol in the space. And I've been very curious about how this stuff is handled from a from a legal perspective, especially when builders are in different countries and different jurisdictions, and it oftentimes is hard to find out who owns what and um, who's copying who. I always, kind of wondered what would happen if another aquarium just kind of popped up out of nowhere and started hosting AMAs and started using all of our branding. Would we be able to prove that it's ours? I mean, I think we would. But I know that when it comes to other um, when it comes to other brands in Web3, especially like an NFT line or a specific protocol, it gets a bit difficult. However, we've brought on, I know we have a few beloved panelists on currently. We got Jessica in the house, we got the Joker, Motivelli, welcome back, and we have Ark. We're going to have Joe Reben joining us pretty soon here as well. If anyone has comments or expertise or thoughts on this, feel free to request and come up. I'll be talking off the Aquarium account, and I'll be talking off my Noah account as the space progresses. Just realizes me on both accounts. But yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to kick it off, or if anyone has a professional opinion in this on this topic. But yeah, it's something that I have been pondering for quite some time, and I don't know if people have firsthand opinions on this or experiences on this of their art or their ideas being stolen. Um, yeah, I don't know, guys. Not everyone all at once. Aki, I don't know if you have any opening thoughts to add to this, but it's an interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to learning more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easiest case to dive into right now is, kind of from the top down, right? Because you can see the way that Yuga was kind of forced to start litigating things against writer rips. And now that they've, got the trademark or use of logos cases out there, they're kind of compelled to come after other. Sorry about the Pomeranian barking in the background because he's a Pomeranian and he's loud as hell. Um, you know they're kind of compelled to come after everybody now, and I think that this is no different than any major brand that exists out there. And you could see the way that Nike was, came after a bathing ape earlier this year because the shoes are obviously Air Force Ones. um, or the way that Disney came after Etsy a couple of years ago with all of the proliferations of baby Yodas being sold on that site. And provability is when you first started using the mark, in any kind of commercial purpose. So it's not even necessarily a matter of needing to trademark the asset or have that registered in multiple jurisdictions. And given I'm sure people that live in other countries besides the United States are far more knowledgeable about stuff outside of these borders, but at least over here it's a matter of being able to prove that you were the first to, begin using these for commercial purposes and that you were the creator. So while trademarking matters, it's more about being able to prove initial creation. And that's what we've seen in so many different projects that have existed out there. One that comes to mind, well, I wish that it came to my 45-year-old brain, but it's 8 a.m. over here. But you can see it in a number of, like, NFT projects that have used this particular variety of artwork that then is connected back to an artist from several years ago that it's pretty apparent that they sampled from. So even though that artist didn't trademark their creative piece, they can still, claim that infringement and be entitled to damages and so on, unless there's an agreement reached between the project and the artist. So I think like in this world, especially as these startups are turning into major brands, and we're going to see new ones rise over the next year, just like we've seen the Yugas, the Doodles, the Clone X's, and so on. Cool Cats, Pudgy Penguins, On One Force, Azuki. Like it's incredibly important from a branding perspective to protect that. But the question is at what point do you start spending the money legally to start chasing after these people to protect your brands? Because anybody that's been involved in any kind of lawsuit knows it's not only monetarily exhausting, but it's physically and emotionally exhausting no matter which side of the lawsuit that you're on when you do decide to go after somebody. So that's a lot of blabber. You'll see that's what I do, but I'll just shut up there and let other people chip in.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's actually easier to claim claim rights to a certain brand or to a certain line, especially if it's imprinted on the blockchain, right? It's not that hard to go back and look at when something was created, what date it was minted. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on it actually being easier in Web3 to prove property rights when it comes to someone that an artist or a creator that has built something in a certain period of time at a certain point in time?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, having the records that exist now that are immutable are super important. But especially given that we're like what 2 years really into the NFT cycle and everything that'll come out of it, um, you know, the the reality is that a lot of these artists that are creating are sampling prior artworks. Maybe as an homage or an outright copy. And so, in the case of some of these things where it's been tracked down, you can look at Instagram posts that were dated a certain point that preceded the creation of these collections, that from a legal perspective is enough grounds to be able to stand off and say, I am the creator, and this person visibly copied my work and then profited off of it. So, agree on the blockchain aspect. That's great going forward, but you just need to be able to prove creation dates. And there's a number of ways that they've done that before, but the blockchain just makes that simpler.
Ark, I know you had your hand up, and maybe Joker answered the question, or rather, gave the response you were going to give. I'm going to follow up with another question for Joker or anyone else that wants to answer it. But what if a creator is anonymous? What if a creator is anonymous and they're having their rights infringed upon? How do you contest that? What happens in that case? And we have Joe, Joe on the panel as well. Welcome, Joe.
Hey guys, how's it going?
But yeah, Joker, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on what would happen in that case, where you have a creator that's completely anonymous and wants to stay anonymous, but also wants to take action against someone who is clearly infringing on their intellectual property rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a number of instances where that's occurred, and there's a lot of ways that you can seek recourse to that. I mean, I would assume that a number of creators, especially the larger that their business gets, they may have incorporated into some sort of LLC or S corp or whatever it is, an illegal entity, and that legal entity could file the lawsuit on behalf of that creator without allowing them to be doxxed. Um, but when it comes to being able to debate these things in a court of law, obviously that person is going to need to take the stand. And zooming from a black hole in front of a judge is probably not going to hold up. So those people really have to assess, hey, is this monetarily worth it for me to defend my intellectual property, and have myself doxxed in that respect? Or is it something that, I'm going to try to resolve through channels that aren't as forceful as going the direct legal route, like negotiating, discussing, and so on. But there's plenty of examples where, in the Web 2 world, where you have shell corporations that are protecting the overall ownership group that are represented by counsel, that will allow a company to represent themselves without needing those people to be have their names front and center.
Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me up, Noah. And very interesting space, as I might add, because with the transition we've seen in the last couple of years from Web 2 to Web 3, it's a whole different universe of legality, so to speak, and the laws that apply, right? But the way we're looking at it, and I think Joker was right, it really is traditional business, rules that hold and protect the industry. What we're seeing is a lot of non-doxed creators and development teams for these Web3 companies. Well, if something goes wrong, like we've seen happen, especially with the SEC's overreach and other organizational overreach in 2022 to try to form some sort of regulation by enforcement, which is a whole other story. We see these anonymous creators being brought to the front, like was said, and having to take the stand or otherwise be named in court documents. That being said, I think, shell companies and however you want to put it, and protective layers, I guess, corporate structural layers, don't really apply to the same extent once, there's a legal issue. Because what happens is, if you guys understand how corporations are structured, or even if you don't, there are what's called ultimate beneficial owners, right? No matter if it's a foreign or a domestic corporation, those are the people that own the equity. At least 10% of the equity behind it. So typically that's a small group of people that form these corporations to protect their IP, their branding, whatever it may be. But when it comes to the legal, the corporate veil is pierced when it comes to, most of the time when it comes to any court case or things of that nature, because you have to get at the heart of the issue and the people that are performing the bad acts, right? Or the acts in question. So, what we're seeing now is this shift from people thinking that being non-doxed and anonymous and all this stuff is cool. And, it is in a sense, because spirit of crypto and NFTs and whatnot, and Web3 really is still decentralization, but it's a shift to more formalized, more form-fitting legal premises and legal structures, as we've seen in other financial and tech asset classes.
So,
a lot to digest, I know. Sorry.
No, yeah. So Joe, you're saying that there's no real way, if you're a non or undoxed, to step forward and really claim any sort of rights unless you're willing to at least reveal your identity to a small percentage of people, those being involved in the decision making.
Yeah, if you're a developer on a project or a founding member or something like that, and you're a good actor, honestly, it's in your best interest to claim those rights and file something, whether it's or at least get them out in the public. You don't necessarily have to file trademarks or patents or go that route, as long as it's in the public flow of commerce and people see it, right? And whoever it's really whoever gets it out there first. And if it's out there in the course of business, then yeah. It's yours, right? Pretty much, because you've created it. You can prove timestamp wise you've created it, or otherwise on the blockchain you've created it. And it's just one of those things that it's in your best interest to do so, especially if you're a good actor, because it's good. First of all, it's good publicity. Second of all, it's good for your brand and good for your business. And third of all, it really strengthens your standing, like we're talking about here. And if anything happens to go down in a legal or regulatory light.
Motivelli, go for it.
Hey, Noah, thanks for the invite. Hey, everybody. I agree with Joker was saying about putting the time in and whether you want to enforce something. I'm going to take the perspective away from big brands and look at it as a small creator. I think there's that first starting point, which is like the ethics of not copying someone, right? Or trying to do something original. so that you're starting from a good spot, and hopefully you don't have to go down that copyright road down the future. But I also think it's worth protecting yourself as much as possible by, they used to say, oh, as soon as you create something, you are the copyright owner. And the real old school way to do it was to like mail yourself something in the post office, and they would say, look, I sent it to myself. This is legally binding now. And now we have blockchain. So maybe just the art of just putting something on chain, even if you aren't intending to sell it, if it's just kind of sitting there, that's a good start as well if you think you're going to be building a big brand. It's just an immediate thoughts here. I like your thinking about this because, there's this saying like originality breeds imitation, which breeds originality. And especially in art and design, every time something amazing happens or someone gets notoriety off of a project, all of the copycats come out. You see it with software, you see it with UI. Apple's a good example. And like the 2010s, like as soon as Apple did something, everything was clean design, no personality. All the UI was super, super clean. And the pendulum swings back and forth from this. You see it with derivatives of ape projects, right? With the perspective of a character facing like 3/4 of the way or pixelated. So successful stuff always breeds these copycats. It's just like, how much of a copy is it? Is it a homage? Is it similar, or is it a direct rip? And I think that that's where the ethics fall in line for the creator of these things.
And in the spirit of like, creators that don't want to dox, right? I can speak from the perspective as I'm advising a startup within the space that's actually creating on-chain legal contracts that will be eventually dumped into wallets, that protect IP rights when you're doing licensing, but that can also be used as proper legal service of a lawsuit. And naturally, we think like, law plays out tremendously in something where everything is written into contract form. And we've already seen it here in the States, in the state of New York dropped contracts into wallets that they wanted to serve. So perhaps in the spirit of creators that want to stay anonymous, these contracts can be dropped from the perspective of, from the project level without, disclosing names initially, but that provide proper legal service that's far simpler, and perhaps wouldn't, create the necessity to have that immediate dox occur.
I like that idea, Motivelli, of destroying something on chain, even if it doesn't have anything to do with the blockchain at all. I even think of having a company that is like Whale Coin Talk, for example, and minting some sort of an NFT. I don't know what would be in that NFT to represent our intellectual property rights. But we do have, I think, an attorney or two on the stage, and maybe they could shed some light, or maybe you could shed some light, Motivelli.
Yeah, I was going to say, throwing something on chain may be just the hack, the workaround to showing copyright. Like there's the trademark, I forget what it's called, but if you want to trademark a word, for example, you have to send it into a copyright office. You have to write it down. They have to look at it, and then they send out. I've done this before, and then they send out essentially a sheet of all the names that are being copyrighted. So like if you see the TM next to a word, this is a good example, that'll go out to other copyright holders, and they'll get a chance to look at it and see if it's an infringement or not. And if it's not, you'll get the claim and you'll get the registration mark. So just by putting something on chain is a signal to say, hey, this is mine, check it out, it's here. And it's just another way to protect yourself, whether or not you're going to use that artwork or that information or those words in the future. People will know that you have an intent to move forward with it.
I'm thinking if there are any, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this just based on my limited research, if there are any Web3 companies that are trying to build infrastructure that allows
no, just add to the conversation. Like, do you think that AI is going to affect this at all? Because I mean, now we've got to think about everything in terms of like we're going to start having information being produced by not only us, a large part of it by actual technological computation. So the fact that that's coming over the next couple of years, what kind of issues do you think that's going to cause for branding and intellectual property? And do you think that it's kind of going to just kind of evaporate and go away? Because a lot of people who I speak to have a lot of concerns that it's kind of just going to be unenforceable, and yeah, it's just going to get wrecked.
Are you talking about like AI, like ChatGPT stuff, like writing things out like that?
Yeah.
It's a great question. But it does remind me of, think of Web 2, where you'd create something. Well, actually, no, let's go even back further than that. Like, let's go back to Napster or music, where people had created audio, and then the distribution of the audio was where it was the infringement, right? So it wasn't actually the creation of the content or the replication of the content; it was the distribution of the content. So I'm not a lawyer, but perhaps a lawyer might be able to chime in. Like, I'd imagine with ChatGPT, you're basically chasing AI and building AI to find out if the AI that has been generated is actually AI that has been taken. And that is a weird area. I wouldn't even know what to say about that.
Joe, I think you've been summoned.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I think the short answer is, honestly, who the hell knows? To be fair, it's a new area of law, right? Every time we create these amazing tech products and, layers of the internet, it's always going to rely on these cases that become seminal cases at some point and set precedent. But inevitably, somebody's going to use OpenAI or ChatGPT or something to create something that is very similar to somebody else, and there will be a lawsuit over it. We know that. People are litigious, especially in the US, unfortunately. And, it's just what's going to happen. We know that. So moving from there, it's going to be a fuzzy area, I predict, for the next 3 to 5 years as ChatGPT and OpenAI and all the use cases get refined and developed, and it becomes part of our everyday lives and everyday commerce and e-commerce and ecosystems. But it's a great question, because we're going to see how courts rule on it, right? We didn't know how courts were going to handle the internet in the 90s and early 2000s, and they handled it just fine. They developed precedents and cases around it and case studies. We didn't know how they were going to handle Web 2 layer. They've also developed, a comprehensive set of laws surrounding that. But they're going to struggle to catch up, because, you're trying to have elected officials, which we know don't always sit on the precipice or the forefront of tech and tech development, try to navigate and negotiate their ways through, a brand new territory for all of us, right? I mean, this is only a couple of years, few years old, even at its outset, really, for these use cases and these programs. And now that they're in the public stream of commerce, you're right. It's going to be a race to see what ChatGPT and OpenAI can do for you. So I think it's going to be very business and industry specific how these court cases get decided. And it's going to be people that are probably bigger players that have a lot of money that can withstand a big suit. And unfortunately, we're going to see some smaller companies get run over. That's just the nature of the game. But if those smaller companies have a better claim, they're probably going to also be winning suits against bigger companies and have some kind of settlement where they either sell out, buy out, or are allowed to continue, based on what the offer is. So, my fear is that, of course, the big boys take over and, kind of overrun or run over the industry. And it really does hurt the smaller players. But I think there's going to be a balance struck by courts, especially when we've been seeing these rights kind of develop in a lot of areas of the world, especially globally. And we're going to be seeing a lot of suits outside the US that have very different results than suits inside the US. So there's going to be a time period where these regulations have to and precedent comes to mold together, right? I mean, hell, we don't even have a set of crypto regulations that are global. And it's been 16 years. So who the hell knows?
What happens if someone has their rights infringed upon by an entity outside of the US, Joe?
Well, here's the thing: it's global, right? The internet is global. There's places where you can still sue international entities within the U.S., especially if you're a U.S. entity. If their marketing or their advertisement, or they have U.S. customers, or they have U.S. participants, that's sufficient context. That's the rule of law is you have to have sufficient context to a place to or avail yourself in a legal sense of that place to be able to bring suit. So the venue will be proper, to speak legalese for a minute, if there are sufficient contacts or people availing themselves of these services. And with big companies that have global branding and global reach, typically the U.S. is going to be a place they attack. And, because we have, high net worth and high rate of consumption in the U.S. as opposed to the rest of the world. So they'll probably be able to bring suit here. It's just going to be a matter of which venue is best for them to bring suit.
Motivelli.
Yeah, from a small content perspective, again, it just reminds me of when Instagram was going through their growth period, and you would see, or at least I experienced this, I don't know if anyone else did, people would screenshot other people's posts and then repost them, and then these counts were growing because they were basically taking a bunch of other content, and then they were saying in the comments like, "Oh, I don't own this post, DM me if you know who it is." And it's like, what a joke, like what a crazy way, what a weird way for people to steal things, and then to say that they're not really stealing or they have no intent to actually steal, which goes back into the ethics thing. But when this was happening a lot on Instagram, I do remember close friends just saying, "Hey, this person's stealing my stuff. Get on there and flame them and shame them and like report them." So the good thing about these tools, these digital tools, is that there are ways, at least there are some mechanisms to alert the platforms that this behavior is taking place. Like you see it on Twitter when people start copying accounts, and you're able to report them. So they're not perfect, but they're a step in the right direction. And I think that type of behavior is more effective early on than jumping into the legal areas. But there are definitely, we're seeing it now with the platforms with NFTs where the projects are closely copied or the names are closely copied, and that's just super frustrating because people are here, they make something, and then, oh look, here's a copycat, here's a clone, and it's almost taking the exact thing. That's unethical, and hopefully those reporting tools on these platforms get a little bit better and can take some cues from the Web2 reporting.
Well, I've always wondered, and by the way, I'm not sure if there's certain people that can't hear me on this account. Peter, just really quick mic check, because I don't know if I know that you weren't able to hear me before.
Got you now.
Okay,
thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so Motivelli, I always wondered this about protocols that are being hard forked, like when Uniswap first came out, and you started to see other chains go live and everyone and their mom was doing a Uniswap fork or Uniswap copy. Yeah, how does it work when you take proprietary code that another team has worked very hard to build, and you copy paste it, and then you start earning revenue off of it? You start charging certain fees, or maybe you want to charge more fees than Uniswap, and the average user doesn't recognize that the fees are higher. They're just swapping as the number's negligible for them. I wonder how that works, and I'm not sure if you have any insight into that. Yusuf, welcome, sir. I'll pass the mic to you.
Hey Noah, how have you been?
Big good, man. It's been a while. I'm glad to have you on. I hope you're doing really well.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I've been quite busy, but it's good to finally be back on here. Regarding basically forking different protocols. In crypto, it's pretty much essentially like as close as you can get in any other industry to free markets. With cryptocurrency, you can pretty much fork any sort of project or any smart contract platform. As most of these projects, they don't actually go out and get the proper protection, the IP rights, and they don't patent it. And it's actually, I would say, it's positive and negative, right? Because usually if you're the first product to invent something, if you invent something grand like Uniswap, for example, right, or if there in existing technology like DEXs and you create a DEX that's better in some ways, fees, speeds, etc., scalability, then the tech speaks for itself, the tech markets itself. So if you're the first one to come up with this tech, then you'll grow drastically faster than others. It doesn't matter if others come around and fork your code, you'll still be a lot bigger than the others because you were first, right? That applies to Uniswap. There's a bunch of these Uniswap forks, but since they're the same as Uniswap, why don't you just use the original? So there is really no need to really patent things in crypto, even though you have the option. But it is definitely frowned upon because the beautiful thing about crypto is people approve upon each other. So let's say Uniswap gets created, that you can fork a majority of the Uniswap code, but then you can change some things to make it better. There's this whole thing with like the Olympus DAO and all the Olympus DAO forks, and it was a good experiment because you could see all these other projects are forking each other, and they're trying to create their own sort of like economic coin, um, the some weird demand and supply project. But yeah, we know how that turned out. But some fail, some succeed. But it pushes the crypto market forward because the best one will come out on top, right? It isn't about, oh, I have the patents, so no one else can copy me, and I'm going to be the only one, even if there's better options available. Because patents can be a good or a bad thing. Like if you look, especially in the pharma industry, because a lot of things like insulin, for example, or what was that drug again for the allergies? I forgot the EpiPen, right? If you invent something and you patent it, then you have the rights to it. No one else can manufacture it. You can upcharge in prices, and it's very anti-competitive. And it might be good for the creators of the crypto, but it's very bad for consumers. It's bad for crypto adoption. It's bad for new people entering the market because it stops better, newer alternatives from being created. So that's why I'm with forks. So if you create a crypto tech, you should allow people to come and fork it and try and improve on your tech. And if they fork your code exactly correct, and they're better than you, then you failed in the marketing department, or you failed in the tech department because your tech wasn't good enough to carry it forward without marketing itself. But there have been instances where there's been patents of crypto. Like you look at the trash Hedera H-bar, they patented most of their chain. So it's possible, but at the same time, it is frowned upon, right? There's no need. Everything's open source in crypto.
Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to push back on that just a bit. A lot of stuff is open source, absolutely. And I think what Yusuf said about the code and the need to improve and will to improve with good actor developers in this space is really prevalent. I do agree with all that, but there are certain things that do have to be by nature proprietary as well, for a number of reasons, right? There's big companies that we don't want, having copies of. Like Binance protects a lot of their source code, as well as other exchanges and other, larger infrastructure type ecosystems in the crypto space. So there's a balance there, just like anything else. And yes, a lot of people will argue that it goes against the decentralized spirit of crypto, and in a sense it may. But you also do need to balance that against protecting your business and protecting your investment and your work from your development teams all the way down to, all the way up to the C-level that have either funded this or structured this over the years to put it together. So it is a delicate balance. And I do think that at the end of the day, improvements that get made, it's kind of like any other industry. If you remember, there's a great case that to put this to in the music industry, where art is unique if even the slightest change is made to it. And it was Under Pressure, David Bowie, and David Bowie's Under Pressure, when Vanilla Ice took it and changed one minuscule beat to the song and wrote Ice Ice Baby. Like that was deemed enough of a deviation from the beat of the song where they didn't have to pay royalties. So the same applies really in this industry, where people make developments and improvements upon open source code and utilize part of it. It's open source for a reason. It's out there so other people can build upon it, right? Whereas proprietary code is protected also for a similar reason, because people want to protect their IP. And it's very important to protect their IP, like I said before, for various reasons. You might be a market leader, you might be an industry sector leader, and you want to have that first mover advantage. So it's really a give and take here, and it's really finding that balance and that blend so as to not have conflict, legal conflict, because no one wants that. At the end of the day, people want to be able to go out and build in this space and develop in this space in a positive, net positive manner. And that still cuts back to, if I can tie it all in, to the, being upfront and being transparent about who you are at that point in the industry, and not being anonymous. If you're developing something great and you're a good actor, there's no reason to be anonymous. You should be proud of your work.
Peter, welcome.
Thanks, Noah. great conversation, and there's so much here. I don't even know where to begin. There is, first and foremost, that distinction between copyright and patent. Copyright is, when with regard to code, the language of the code can be seen as a literary work. That's how it's kind of been classified, whereas the patents apply to actually implemented software. If we're dealing with copyright, whether with regards to like works of art or strings of code, if people out in the audience want to get that protection, although copyright does attach at the moment of fixation, you would all be well advised to register your copyrights. The registration of copyright is a prerequisite to bringing suit in federal court and also prima facie evidence. So make sure you do that. And with regard to whether code itself, whether lines of code are easily protectable, it's a close question. And it depends on whether the use of the allegedly infringing party is fair use. And so there's a recent case, if people want to look it up, Google versus Oracle, which went through all the fair use factors. There's 4 of them, and determined whether the allegedly infringing material was in fact kind of a derivative of the source material. So as with all things federal courts, there's going to be a test at the end of the day. And if people choose to litigate it, that's on them. But I think the overriding point that people are agreeing with here is that in the Web3 space, it's kind of like trial by community. Like very few of us bozos in here are actually going to litigate in federal court. We leave that to the Googles of the world. And at the end of the day, it comes down to just behaving ethically. And if you're really kind of forking and passing other people's work off as your own, you're not going to make it. Whereas if you're taking open source material and making something new, people are generally going to be okay with that. So one thing about crypto that I like is the court of public opinion so far is more powerful and at least certainly more accessible than the courts that, sit with big robes and wigs and all the rest of it.
Motivelli.
Yeah, Vanilla Ice. Whew. That Queen and David Bowie song, that was a big song. And I remember when Vanilla Ice was on TV back in the day, trying to justify his change in that bass line. I mean, it was a major eye roll for me because I was like, this is an absolute rip. And he didn't ask for permission, or he didn't connect with the other artists. But I just did some Google research, and it looks like he paid them $4 million to own the rights of the song. So there's no royalties that were paid out. So eventually, I guess if it's big enough, the law will catch up to people that are trying to rip. But it seemed, and I remember this, like going back to intent, he clearly stole that. And then, created something new, granted, but without leaning into the other creators of that, it sets a bad precedent. So again, I'm just echoing this ethics stuff, and it also made me think about the open source versus proprietary stuff. Like in the internet, you've got to land on one side, right? You have to say, do I want to make open source for people and build this stuff and work and kind of live like a nonprofit and just share all my stuff out, or do I want to make proprietary software and kind of sell it? And those two have always been at odds with each other, at least in my experience and how I look at the internet. And I don't know how Web3 and decentralization is going to net out. In the beginning, I thought, okay, Web3, decentralization, everything's open source. We're building to better ourselves, to better our infrastructure. But as you see, there's a lot of platforms that are spinning off, that are taking and creating proprietary, at least trying to create proprietary brands or proprietary offerings within forks, if you will.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback off of what Yusuf said, because I think that there's obviously imitation is the greatest form of flattery, but if other people see that what you're doing is successful and that it's, got legs, that ultimately competition and imitation is going to spring up. And I think, kind of what he was, sharing along the lines of, keep your head down and keep building and staying out front. That first mover's advantage is your moat. And while we can get bogged down in the concept of thinking that we need to litigate, the question is at what cost? It's the cost of your capital, your distraction, and what that takes away from what you could be building to continue to iterate and stay out front. And because I'm old as fuck here, and pardon me for using, my usual language, but I am old as fuck. And, I remember back when everybody said in 2001 that Amazon was going to the grave and what it was doing. And a couple of years later, then you had the Walmart.coms and the Target.coms, and they failed spectacularly because Amazon had such a massive moat that existed and a loyal customer base. So obviously, they've been able, the larger companies have been able to throw billions of dollars at it, but they still haven't been able to dethrone Amazon because they built up a loyalty of consumers that love the way they were building and what they were doing. And they'll never, I mean, when's the last time anybody up here placed an order on Walmart.com? I don't think I ever have. So if you are building something and you are getting the attention that's causing others to copy you or to try to, take you down by doing what you do, just keep pushing forward. Continue to do it better. And if you really do hit massive success, then there will come a time and place for you to litigate things that genuinely matter. But my advice, right, is like, yeah, it sucks when people copy you, but that just really should show that you're genuinely onto something.
I guess what I was getting at when I started this whole thread was, yes, everything's open source, but if you design a protocol that's a big moneymaker and it's open source, does that mean that anyone can just, well, if people take that and copy it and are also making money off of it, is that just in the spirit of crypto? It's fine. I made this, but people love it and it's been a great success. And if they want to copy paste it, and if users want to go and use their version of it and they can make money off of it without doing any work, or at least doing as much as the work that I did, then that's okay. Is that kind of the ethos that we're all getting behind?
I wish there was a shrug emoji because I don't know the answer to that, and I want to hit some shrug emojis.
I mean, if it's open source, right? Isn't that the principle of open source in the beginning? It's just the way that Tesla published their batteries as open source, and obviously a lot of other companies have come out and tried to create a competing product, but they haven't been able to do it as well. So sure, should you pay homage? Does it seem ethically correct just to copy and try to continue to profit off of something that somebody else has created? From an ethical perspective, probably not. But we don't live in a world full of idealists. And well, I mean, there are idealists, but there's far more people that are going to try to get by with doing nothing and making money than there are people that are willing to build something and profit off of their own merits. But bottom line, again, right, if it's open source, it's the principle of it, it's open source.
Yeah, Motivelli. So go ahead, Marco.
Yeah. No, I was going to come in. I'm basically doubling down on Joker, but I'm going to give a bit of a use case as well. So he's right. If you think about the ethos, the values behind open source, you shouldn't. It's all about putting back into the community. So if you build a protocol and you do some iterations on that protocol under the ethos, you should be feeding that back in to the community so that somebody else could utilize it. But the best case in point use case that I know, anyone that knows learning management systems, probably the most popular, widely used learning management system in the world is Moodle. Moodle is open source, but I have lost count of the number of companies that have downloaded the Moodle repository from GitHub, done some adaptations, some features for their own, and then have just resold that platform as their own intellectual property and not fed back into the community the enhancements and the features that they made. So the bottom line is, I think this is to Joker's point, people are people. So some will abide by the ethics and some will just utilize open source to make a ton of money. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, Motivelli. I also wish I had a shrug button because, yeah, a shrug emoji. Because I don't know. I don't know the answer either. But go ahead, go for it.
I was thinking about Joker. I'm also old as fuck, so I do appreciate that, and I have some crazy steam heat happening in my apartment. So if you hear some weird whistling, it's that steam action.
Hey, you two, I'm calling you both out. Don't try and do the age flex on me in this space. Come on, come on.
Okay.
Yo, 45, bro. If anybody can cap out 45 old as fuck years, like, please step up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. You guys remember when Instagram bit Snapchat stories and everyone just like freaked out and was like, I mean, this is a copycat of a feature. Now it's not a copycat of code, obviously, but the copycat of using the feature in the way that it was intended was a way to create growth on another platform. So this level of like, fast follow or cloning of features is not like really a new thing. Like you see this a lot, and it really goes into pumping the amount of effort into it to copy it to make it a success or not. Like I don't use Snapchat. I used it for a very brief amount of time, and none of my friends use it. But everyone is using Instagram stories. They're not even really posting on the main feed anymore. So it was a huge win for them. If they had not done that, I don't think they would have had the level of growth that they had at the time. So ethically, was it correct? I don't know. That's another shrug emoji thing, because features are a dime a dozen, right? Could you say that if there's a hashtag on Twitter that there shouldn't be a hashtag somewhere else? The internet is like built, and people start using things the way that they start behaving differently digitally. So I don't, again, where's the shrug emoji? I don't know. I don't even know whether or not I find it valuable, but it's worth noting that the cloning of features is also a big issue. And you start seeing this now with Blur and OpenSea. Like this is exactly like back and forth. It's a war. It's like Mac PC all over again.
I think we got Joe and then DeFi University.
Yeah, shrug emoji would be perfect for this topic. I think everybody's hitting the nail on the head. It's, like I said, it's a, and everybody's alluding to properly. It's a balancing act. It's delicate, and it's really in this space about being creative and not letting big companies run over the little guys, especially as the space is developing. So that we got to remember, like the Amazons of the world started in Bezos. They started in a garage, right? I mean, so did Apple, so did all these companies that came to rule the world. So you gotta give the small guys some protection. But then it's also important that, in this industry, especially since things develop so quickly, I think the other thing is true too, the other way around. Small guys got to remember the small guys, when they get big, have to remember kind of where they came from and where they started from, right? And that they're building upon foundational levels that have been developed by brilliant developers out there on a global scale. And, what's really unfortunate about that, in the US at least, is that the SEC and other regulatory bodies, not to get into it too much, are stifling this development actively with this regulation by enforcement and shuttling off, talent overseas, which is the exact antithesis of what we saw with Web 1, where they were welcoming Web 1 companies. They allowed them to develop. They set a guidelines, right? And they developed those guidelines that everybody knew where the sandbox was they wanted to play in. But, tech outpaces regulation, of course, and it's just getting worse. But at the end of the day, you have to have a fair shake. You have to have that tipping point where is too much, where you're just not improving anything upon open source and just ripping it and putting a new skin on it and a new UI and saying this is mine. Maybe adding like one feature for like one fee or something silly, like you said with the OpenSea and Looks Rare and all those other site type wars, where there's just like maybe miniature features being added on. But good example of a tech giant, by the way. OpenSea controls the vast majority, 90% of the market. Or where there's actual development going on, cross-chain in between different chains, and they're using maybe little bits of open source code, and you really, clamping down on it, developing it with their own development teams and developing something wonderful. So, next 3 to 5 years, that shrug button's going to be hit a lot. I wish it was on Twitter for a lot of different things. And I guess that's just what we're going to see how it shakes.
Let's go with DeFi University.
All right, cool. So this is a Web3 space, but Bitcoin isn't really Web3, right? Like the Bitcoin white paper came out in 2009. I wouldn't say Web3 until like 2020 ish. And the reason why I'm bringing up Bitcoin Web3 now, or Web3 Bitcoin, is because I'm actually I'm a developer. I'm a Web3 developer developing layer 3 Bitcoin metaverse. So, the metaverse, Meta, OpenSea, Decentraland, Sandbox, all these things we know as the metaverse, right? And Web3. So I'm actually building upon a Bitcoin metaverse. So if anybody's interested in a Bitcoin metaverse, XR, NFTs on Bitcoin, let me know, and we can talk about it.
Marco. Marco, you're up.
Yeah, no, I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. No, I just wanted to. Joseph raised a very good point. Made me think. Maybe even triggered me, Joseph. So thank you for that. When he said, technology typically outpaces legislation. And I think it's a fantastic point, because not only does it outstrip legislation, I think it also outstrip a lot of laws, stroke models, stroke theories that we've sort of lived by. And an example that I use is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I love how people use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to prove a point around needs and requirements of human beings. But hey, that is so outdated and so fundamentally flawed now. We should just give up on it. And, at the end of the day, it was something that was created 50 years ago. And the world today is very different than the needs of us as human beings and our wants and requirements 50 years ago. But anyway, I'll leave that one there. But in relation to sort of, it got me thinking around the IP in around things like AI and the like. And of course, there are probably experts on this space, far more knowledgeable than me. So I'm just going to give it a high level as an investor perspective, which is, I've thought for a long time now that where intellectual property laws and rights are very outdated, in that, for me, they were typically geared towards an output, a thing, if you like, but didn't really factor into what I call the humanistic side, the creative side, the human building something, and it could be a different iteration each time. So I think for me, the way that we look at IP needs to adapt and change. And of course, if we look at like AI, there is the potential to make it very simplistic from an IP perspective. We could create IP around our algorithm. We could create IP around the data set, the database that's got all the information, and that would cure a lot of the challenges, I guess. But to your point, Noah, being open source, that's probably not something that you would want to do. So I just wanted to sort of put my hand up and basically say, and agree with Joseph in a way, that I'm not sure I would necessarily ever want to go to court on the back of one of my portfolio companies. But I think there's some things we can do to circumvent some potential hurdles coming down the line, and maybe we should just look at the whole process, the intellectual property law, from the ground up again anyway, for these new emerging times that we live in. And I'll leave it there.
Motivelli.
Marco, good to hear from you. I thought I recognized your voice when I checked your icon there on Spaces. So thanks for the insights. I want to offer also another perspective with Web3 as it concerns protocols, right? So there's always going to be forks on protocols, slight variations on protocols. And there's a lot of focus on protocols now in Web3. And I think the reason is because there's a race to standardize, right? What's the protocol that should be used to create the standard? And standards are important because of reliability. If you have a good protocol that's reliable, then you can create new types of experiences using those protocols. And the more Web3 protocols that become standardized, the closer we come to a Web3 infrastructure, right? The right combination of protocols becomes infrastructure. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 200. And that infrastructure, for better or worse, could become the world computer of Web3, right? Whether it's, you see Ethereum is always talking about this. But if everything is running on the internet, if everything is running decentralized, what are those protocols? Right now, everything's fragmented, right? What are those protocols that actually make up the real Web3, not the Web 2.1 that we have right now? So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of deviation in protocols, even in the slightest.
We got Ark next, and then Peter. I don't know I think Ark might not be able to hear me. I noticed that last.
I'm not sure if you're trying to hand it to me, but no, I cannot hear you at all. Like my space is absolutely rocked.
Yeah.
So
yes, Ark, he did hand it to you.
Yeah. I was just kind of guessing. Yeah. So 2 things. First of all, Marco, you hit that nail on the head. That's absolutely spot on. So I feel like, with everything that's going on and with the kind of exponential growth that everything's experiencing at the minute, we are coming into a time where a lot of the models that we use to kind of understand how society works and how, we work and whatever, they're literally going to have to be thrown out the window, because we're coming into a time where kind of everything's just blended together. Information isn't just now information within our physical reality. Information can be copy and pasted, moved about, changed, and it happens artificially on a very fast process, rather than just maybe making a glass of water in the real world, just for example. So I think that over the next couple of years we're going to see we're going to be in a world that we couldn't even predict, because the models that come out up until that point are going to be completely out of this world. So one example that Marco triggered me to think of is, like, imagine with like IP rights and how we discussed that AI is probably going to throw a wrench in the works. Imagine in a world where where information is changed and kind of spun up and just truncated and moved about so fast, and it's just going to get faster and faster. It's going to be kind of like IP models or a standard where we try and group ownership for a particular concept. We're just going to have to evolve with the model that we're working with. So now that we're, maybe in the future where we have a system where it's so easy to just change a piece of information and create a new piece of IP faster and faster, we might have to create some sort of way that we can track IP across time, kind of like time series data, where one day IP might be like a percentage of this for another person, and then the next day it could be tied to another person and maybe a bit more. And yeah, we are really going to have to think about how we can use these systems in the future. And then just quickly going off what Motavelli said, building the protocol. That's something that I've been very heavily doing for the past 2 weeks. I've been having a lot of sleepless nights, and you're actually absolutely right. There needs to be kind of this next step in protocol creation where people are creating ways that accelerate protocol creation itself in the future, and accelerate the amount of things that can be done in a shorter time span, really. And so I'm hoping that in the next couple of kind of months we're really going to see that jump from just having kind of solidity contracts that do one thing or another thing, to starting to see some infrastructure which links these contracts together and start actually kind of emulging into some infrastructure that we can use every day.
Hey, Ark, I actually moved over to the Aquarium account because I think for whatever reason you can't hear me off my personal when I'm speaking, so might clear up some confusion there. I'm going to pass the mic to Peter and then Jessica.
Thanks. So yeah, whenever we do these like in detail legal spaces, I try to leave something of value for people who might be listening. Like people who are here are probably wondering, like, what do I do as a creator if I feel someone is infringing? So the first thing is, if you feel you've created something valuable, whether it's a PFP collection or some code you don't want people to take, register it with the Copyright Office, look into it, go online, figure out how to do it. And once you've done that, that's a precondition to bringing suit. And so you can think about that. Now, people say, okay, I can't afford a lawyer. Let's leave this to the big people to get everything figured out. And you don't have to do that necessarily. It's possible to bring suit. It's called pro se. You can file it with the court on your own. You don't need an attorney. And typically, pleadings will be construed the most favorable way for pro se litigants to give them access to the courthouse. So if you really did just want to file a lawsuit saying this motherfucker took my shit, you can do that, have that be one line, and then the court will typically help you out. Federal courts are a lot more accessible than state courts in a way because they're trying to do that kind of equitable justice. So if you are feeling like somebody's taking your stuff, you don't have to necessarily even rely on attorneys to do it for you. Don't ever let an attorney be a gatekeeper like that. They love to pretend that they're valuable. We're not so valuable. You can do it on your own.
Jessica, mic's yours.
Hey, yeah, a lot of stuff in this conversation, very interesting. I'm not sure I quite understand all of it, but I have my own experience. So thanks for having me up, by the way. My name is Jessica Wildchild, and for the past year, I've basically been taking commissions from predominantly Bored Ape Yacht Club, and obviously this ties into the IP rights because, do you mind if I pin one to the top to show what I mean?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, sick. Yeah, so basically, with permission from the owner, I paint these apes. They're all commissioned work. Now, I wouldn't paint an ape randomly. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like, people ask me, oh, can I buy that ape painting? Can you? And they won't actually have an ape themselves. And I'm like, well, obviously I'm not going to do that because you actually don't own it. So it's always done with the permission from the owner. But then another layer to it is I was going to open a merch store and then start putting out stickers and prints because people actually do really like the paintings, but obviously I'm not going to do a painting. So I was like, well, people could enjoy like a print, that's good for Web3, like gets it all out, like mixes the art world. It's cool. But then I went through everyone that I'd done a commission on and asked their permission first. Some people, only like 1 or 2 people out of like the 56 didn't want it, just politely declined. But then everyone else was down for it, but with a 70-30 split with any profits. So that's kind of like my 2 cents on that. But then also, as an artist, they say all good artists steal. And I think, that is true. Like, we're always nothing is original. Everything's come from somewhere. And, you kind of can't get away from that. But obviously, if you're like ripping someone off or like, being dishonest about your use of something, then obviously like that's not like moral. But yeah, I don't know. Obviously, there's a grey area as well. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else, but that's been my experience with it all.
Marco.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm outside, it's a bit windy. Just wanted to come back on a couple of things that were said. I would, just with all due respect, I slightly disagree with you when you were talking about sort of the models and theories and throw them out the window. I wouldn't necessarily say throw them out. I think we need to iterate upon them. So you probably meant the same thing, so it's just semantics. Using Maslow again. I wouldn't get rid of all the levels of Maslow's needs. But I'd certainly probably get rid of the bottom two, and I'd replace them with socialization, for example, and Wi-Fi. And being a father of 3 teenagers, trust me, Wi-Fi needs to be in the Maslow hierarchy triangle without a shadow of a doubt. Anyway, but, any of you that don't yet have kids, oh, you'll live this. Trust me, you'll live this. And then my right honourable gentleman, Motivating makes a very, very good standards. Probably need some standards, but like anything, when you're an emerging technology or an emerging sector, asset class, like Web3 is, you've probably got to go through some pains before you can come up with some standards. But I just wanted to highlight to the room. So I sit on the, I think it's recognized now, the world's recognized as the Metaverse Standards Forum, and all the big technology companies that you could think of and know, they all sit on that. And I sit on a couple of the working groups, and I can tell you, out of all the working groups, there is not one in the Metaverse Standards Forum that looks into or deals with crypto. Crypto is nowhere near the Metaverse Standards Forum, so I just wanted to share that with everyone.
I wonder who we would have to reach out to get Wi-Fi added to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Marco. It'd be worth looking into.
No, I think that's an easy one. So as you are my favorite millennial, I think you could just create it yourself and make it your own. You just iterated open source.
Yeah, I will call it Noah's Hierarchy of Needs, and I'll mint it as an NFT. That way, no one can steal my my IP rights. Ark, go for it.
I'm just guessing that you passed it to me. Yeah, so just to kind of justify where I was coming from about the throwing the models out the window. So obviously there's still going to be some stuff the same, but like at the minute when, like, let's say the internet came out, we had to change and improve and iterate on our models, such as, like, you know, the way people connect and the way people actually find out about each other and can gain a following. And there's loads of other examples. However, now we're moving into a time where we're no longer the smartest kind of objectifiers of this reality. It's AI, and we're moving closer to that point where more and more of our experiences of life and the way we interface with our devices and real life is going to be more and more controlled by AI and influenced by AI. So I believe that we have to kind of try and rethink and reevaluate even how we think about some of the topics, because we as a civilization haven't even experienced a world where we are not kind of the main deciders and the main in the know, because there's as you may know, there's some things that AI might be able to comprehend that maybe we can't comprehend on a certain level. So I just think it's when we're designing these systems and models and how we think about stuff, we're going to have to be more and more cautious about how it kind of extends into this reality when there's more computation.
Yeah, and I would respond to that, Ark. You can't hear me. I've tried talking on the aquarium and Noah, and I don't think Ark can hear me on either. Marco, I think you had your hand up, so I'm going to pass it to you, and I'll DM Ark here in a minute.
No, I'm good. I'm all good, thanks. And maybe because Noah, you wouldn't have heard what Noah said. So he said he switched to the aquarium and to the Noah. It might be worth you dropping down, my friend, or leaving and then coming back in. He'll bring you straight up, because then you'll be able to hear him.
Thanks, Marco. It's been a good conversation, and I don't find the need to drag things out longer than the need than they need to be dragged out for. I think we've gotten a lot in over the last, I don't know, hour and some change. Ark, let me bring you back up. Ark, can you hear me now? Ark, are you able to hear me, Ark?
Yes, loud and clear. Oh,
okay, awesome.
Twitter's been playing up for ages.
Yeah, no, I tried to switch because I have two phones and I have my personal account on one. I tried to switch and it still didn't work. But what are some of the things that you've read about or you believe AI is going to be able to synthesize and figure out that humans cannot?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So a neat way that I like to think about it is that, like, you know, we are just basically processors. You know, our target is to survive. So if, let's say, we learn how to count and we learn how to do maths, that extends our perception. So whatever we was able to perceive of before in our brain, we can use maths to literally make ourselves able to perceive more. Such as if you see a graph of X and Y and you have, like, you know, stock data, you can perceive what's happening with stocks over time. So AI is kind of like this maths on steroids that's coming about that allows us to see even more past that kind of maths layer that we just, you know, kind of had all our entire lives. And some of the things that I feel like that's going to be used for is, you know, you hear the normal examples of, like, using it in biomedicine. So being able to think about chemical reactions on a quantum level that you just cannot do within, you know, like a real life experiment currently. And so just kind of being able to artificially simulate stuff at a greater rate at which we can experience it in a real experiment. I think that's where the greatest difference between what we understand and what the AI understands is going to come from. Because it all boils down to the AI is the interface, the thing that is controlling this kind of research and the way it moves. And we are just kind of seeing the feedback from that. So it's like you can imagine a black box, and all that we experience is what the AI is giving back to us. And you can think of it as the same as dark matter. So we know that dark matter's there, but we haven't proven it exists. We just know it's there because we can see the effects that it has on everything else. And so we're kind of in the same position where we are just observing feedback from the AI and trying to make sense of what we can with that.
Beautifully drawn analogy with respect to AI and dark matter, what we can see versus what we know is there but can't make sense of. Motivelli, go for
it. So here's a question for Ark and the group about AI. So if we assume that AI is being trained with all the data it has now, copywritten material, not copywritten material, once we get past that awkward phase, is it safe to say that we could, and again, this might be a rhetorical question, but is it safe to say that we could create an AI that's trained ethically so that it avoids infringement to begin with, to then create a whole nother set of original things? Wouldn't that be the ideal state for AI in general, as opposed to, oh, look, AI took this and it's actually mine, or I created this and it's wrong and it's unethical? Like, if AI is running free in a sense, it has the ability to avoid any level of infringement.
Yeah, like on a technical level, you're absolutely correct. Like, if we can somehow create this machine that was able to work in an ethical fashion, then the machine worked. That's brilliant. The problem is actually creating that machine. So you know, there's going to be a lot of kind of barriers to entry. So one of them is, like, actually getting the data. So you've got to think about it is like who's actually going to decide what is classed as IP infringement and what isn't. And as you may know, you've seen a lot of edge cases that AI have, such as like if OpenAI stop you from inserting a certain prompt, you could do something called prompt injection, where you kind of wrap the prompt around in like a different kind of wording just to try and trick the AI, but it still tells you the original answer that you was looking for. So you can see how when you have something as ambiguous as a system as AI, there's a lot of edge cases that are very hard to detect. And it isn't just a case of, you know, an upper bound and a lower bound in the majority of senses that we have in software. It's more of a sense of we have to quantify a multi-dimensional system and how it behaves and affects in all different dimensions. And with a trillion parameters nearly, like that isn't something easy to do. And so regardless of, even if we find a way that we can get every person on earth to somehow contribute to this system of how we should do AI, how we should keep IP enforced, I think it's going to cause more harm than good because of the amount of kind of edge cases and the complexity of the system that it will result in.
I suppose when it comes to IP rights, it's a bit more clear cut. But anytime, and I'm hearing this terminology used quite often, anytime I hear ethical AI, my first question is always who is deciding what is ethical and what is not ethical. But that's kind of a tangent that takes us on a different conversation. But I don't know. IP rights is one thing. Ethical AI, I hear that a lot, and I think even if you asked, you could do an entire episode on this, honestly. But even if you asked 50% of people, or excuse me, if you asked like 50,000 people in this country what is ethical, you would get a broad range of different answers. So ultimately, who's designing the AI and who's determining what is ethical and what is not? I don't know. I think this is a decent stopping point, though. I mean, it's been a good space. Sometimes we don't go that long, and we kind of cover everything, cover all our bases. We explore the topic, and most people, I think, here agree. With respect to most people, I feel like agree with respect to intellectual property rights and branding in the Web3 space. Right? We talked about open source versus proprietary code, and the fact that ultimately, if you're going to build something in the former category, then you're going to be open to other people copying your idea, building derivatives of your idea, and you should take it as a positive. If you have an idea, or if you are building something, mint an NFT on chain. I think Motivelli said that that's really important to do. Just get something on there. Sorry, my cat's going crazy. And yeah, I don't know if you guys had any closing thoughts. A lot of our panelists have dropped off, but I think this is a good stopping point. I'm still a bit sick from the last week, so my brain's a bit slow and foggy. I really appreciate you guys coming on and carrying the space for me. I'm hoping to be back to my normal self by next week. And anytime you guys want to join, Motivelli comes on here all the time. Marco, Peter comes on here all the time. Hey, Ark, you're always welcome back. I know, again, a lot of our panelists dropped off, but anyone's always welcome to hop on these panels. I believe next week we're going to be talking about Instagram and Facebook's implementation of a paid check mark and what that means for the future of other social media platforms, why that makes or does that make Elon a trailblazer, and then kind of exploring the nuances between each social media platform's respective blue check marks. So that's one that I'm hoping to be in better shape for, physically and also mentally, so that I can keep up with the beloved panelists. And if you guys want to come on for that, just shoot me a DM to my personal account, and we can go from there. But Thank you, everyone, for joining. Whale Coin Talk community, thank you for listening in to this episode of The Aquarium. My name is Noah, and remember, everything you hear on these broadcasts is meant for educational purposes only. Nothing is financial advice. So take care. Be safe out there. Bye-bye.